Very good morning to all of you. This lecture was supposed to be on symptom complex and investigations in neurology. We would be focusing on symptom complex today, and if time permits, we'll go to the investigations part as well. Okay. So the first and foremost symptom in urology, which you all need to understand, is pain. Pain because of the genitourinary tract, it may be either because of obstruction or inflammation. So you need to understand the nature of the pain. To understand the nature of the pain, you need to understand the etiology, whether the pain is because of obstruction or inflammation. And inflammation, whenever there is inflammatory pain, the most important thing to understand is that the pain is arising from the stretching of capsule, and the stretching of the capsule is because of the inflammation of the parenchyma. Okay. Proceeding further, so you people can ask anytime. Okay, if you have any difficulty, I can pause and then we can discuss the thing. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you all know that pain may be of visceral origin or somatic origin. Before proceeding for pain, we need to understand that the somatic system encompasses body wall, somatic structures, which are the midst of the skin, skeletal muscles, connective tissue, and that pain will be conscious and voluntary. The perception will be conscious and voluntary. And visceral pain, which we are talking, are from the organs, viscera, arising from the mesoderm or the endoderm. They encompass glands, cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, and that perception is unconscious and involuntary. So this is the very cornerstone of understanding any pain anywhere in the body. Okay. Before you get on to the different types of pain in the genitourinary system, you need to understand the supply of the kidney and the ureter. In kidneys or ureter, anything which is parasympathetic will lead to contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles in the internal ureteric sphincter, and the sympathetic system will do the opposite. So a question is very commonly asked in your clinical cases and in the competitive exams, that what is the sympathetic supply. So you need to understand that the sympathetic supply is from the renal plexus, hypogastric plexus from L1 to L2. So these 2 points, that the renal plexus and L1 and L2 from inferior hypogastric plexus, needs to be registered in your mind. And parasympathetic is from S2, S3, S4 from pelvic splanchnic nerves. So sympathetic and parasympathetic and their origin you need to remember for your clinical cases in the exams as well, and the future competitive exams. What is the site of renal pain? So see, the site of the renal pain is ipsilateral costovertebral angle lateral to the sacrospinalis muscle, always beneath the 12th rib. And what is causing that pain? I told you before, it is because of the obstruction or inflammation. Now, what is the method to palpate the kidney, or if you want to see whether the organ is tender or not? Is the diagram clear? Is the diagram visible to all of you?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, you see. What you can see is the bimanual palpation of the kidneys. There are two things. One is bimanual palpation, and the other thing is ballotability. So see, the examining hand, which is the hand at the anterior side of the abdomen, when the patient is inspiring, the kidneys are coming down. So whenever the patient is inspiring and taking a pause, you forward your anterior hand, you forward your main hand, which is on the anterior wall of the abdomen, and you try to palpate the kidneys at the end of the inspiration. So that is how you will get to. I know it is theoretical, but whenever there is enlargement, any mass, hydronephrosis, obstruction, then you might palpate the kidneys like this. So you see, there is some gap between the skin and the kidneys, both anteriorly and posteriorly. So this is what this diagram is showing, is bimanual palpation. And if you can push the kidney from behind, you focus it. If you can push the kidneys from behind and the watching hand can palpate on the anterior abdominal wall, then that to and fro movement is known as blottability. Okay, so bimanual palpation is one thing, blottability is another thing. So in your exams, it will be asked that if you say, sir, I think it is kidney, so the examiner will ask, how have you known that this is kidney? So the first and foremost thing you need to say that by bimanual palpation, and then you need to comment also on the blottability. Very important to understand is if the space between the hand on the anterior wall and the posterior wall, the space between the kidneys and the anterior examining hand or the posterior hand is obliterated. There is no space to make the kidney jump or mobile. You understand? If there is no space, the kidney won't jump. So that won't be blottability. So anything which is bimanually palpable is not blottable, and anything which is blottable is not bimanually palpable. I know it is quite difficult to understand, but these are the points you need to understand. Now, what is the characteristic of the kidney pain? It radiates across the flank anteriorly towards the upper abdomen and umbilicus and may be referred to the testis or labium. Pain because of inflammation would be steady, and pain because of obstruction would fluctuate in intensity. Now, there are two figures. On one side, a gentleman is having his hand on the flanks, and the other side, a gentleman is resting in a couch. So, can you people tell me which is the renal pain and which is the intraperitoneal pain? Anyone? Anyone can make a guess, or if they know it correctly. Which is a renal pain and which is a intraperitoneal pain among these two pictures? Anyone can make a guess, or they can comment. Come on, anyone. Which is the renal pain among these two pictures? Which is the renal pain? Anyone? See, the person standing and having his hand on the flank, his hand is classically in the costovertebral angle. 12th rib behind the 12th rib, lateral to the sacrospinalis at the flanks. So a patient with renal pain would be moving with his hand on the flank, and any patient with her intraperitoneal region of a flank of pain, he would lie still on the bed. You focus on the statement. Any patient who is having intraperitoneal pain would most probably lie motionless on the bed, because if he starts moving, then the contents would move and they will stimulate the peritoneum. So a patient with an intraperitoneal pain would lie still, and a patient with a renal pain with his hand in the flank, he would be moving restlessly. Okay, so by watching these two patients, you can make a rough diagnosis whether it is a case of any intraperitoneal pathology or extraperitoneal renal pain is there. Am I clear till now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Now, what may be the DD of a renal pain? Pain because of renal origin. It at times because of the stimulation of celiac ganglia, or because of the proximity to the other structures like pancreas, duodenum. It can have gastrointestinal symptoms. So it is not as if that if GIT symptoms are there, that pain cannot be of renal origin. And how to differentiate? You see, renal pain is colicky. You can see colicky is a misnomer itself. Biliary colic comes and goes. Renal colic, it stays. Renal colic, if because of inflammation, stitching of the capsule, it will stay. And if it is because of the spasmodic action of the ureteric wall or ureteric colic, it will come and go in waves. So any pain because of intraperitoneal origin will radiate to the shoulder, obviously because of the irritation of the diaphragm and the phrenic nerve. This scenario won't be there in the pain of renal origin. So you make this point very clear. Intraperitoneal pain will radiate to the shoulder. Another DD is radicular pain. Radicular pain is because of the irritation of the subcostal nerves, most commonly T10 to T12. Now, how to differentiate radicular pain from renal pain? The intensity of the radicular pain will change by changing the position, but the intensity of renal pain will not change by changing the position. So, radicular pain and intraperitoneal pain, you need to understand and differentiate at the same time. Coming on to the ureters, we have done the renal pain. Coming on to the ureters. So, most importantly, innervation of the what is we can divide ureter into abdominal ureter and pelvic ureter, or we can divide the ureter into upper ureter, mid ureter, and lower ureter. Anything above the upper margin of the sacroiliac joint is upper ureter. From the upper sacroiliac joint to the lower sacroiliac joint is mid ureter, and anything below the lower margin of the sacroiliac joint downward below till the ureter meets the bladder at Q junction is the lower ureter. So upper ureter, mid ureter, and lower ureter. And then what is abdominal ureter and what is pelvic ureter? So you can see in this diagram where the ureter crosses the bifurcation of the iliacs. Above it is the abdominal ureter and below it is the pelvic ureter. What is the innervation of the abdominal ureter? The sympathetic preganglionic comes from T11 to L2. Mind it, T11 to L2, and postganglionic is from superior hypogastric plexus. Okay, and parasympathetic is by vagus. So you focus on the statement that visceral pain is conveyed via sympathetic pathways to T11 L2 spinal cord segment. This will be surely asked if you are given a case of renal colic in your final exam, or if you are appearing in the competitive exams, that what is the origin of the visceral pain of the abdominal ureter. So you need to understand this statement, sympathetic pathways T11 to L2 spinal cord segments. Remember this always. Coming to the pelvic ureter, again preganglionic sympathetic T11 to L2, postganglionic sympathetic distributed via inferior hypogastric plexus. Abdominal was superior hypogastric plexus, pelvic was inferior hypogastric plexus. Don't make a mistake. It is a very common mistake made by the students in the exam. And the visceral pain is conveyed via sympathetic pathways to T11L2 spinal cord segment. So remember this. Coming to the ureteral pain, it may be acute and secondary to obstruction. And what is the cause of the acute distension of the ureter? It may be because of hyperperistalsis, spasm of the foot muscle. There is some obstruction, and the upper ureter, the muscle of the wall of the ureter, is trying to propel the bolus of urine or the obstruction which is down below forward. Is this picture clear to all of you? Anyone just say randomly. Is this picture clear? The below picture, can you make a guess? Come on, tell me. See, the arrow where it is pointing, is this picture, you don't need to tell me the diagnosis. Is this visible? The arrow and the interluminal structure, that wire is going in the reddish thing that you, is this visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, see. So that is a fibroepithelial polyp. That is a fibroepithelial polyp, and where the arrows are marking, that is a site of obstruction. Okay, so the movement of the upper ureter, the walls causing hyperperistalsis and spasm, that is the cause of pain in ureteric colic. Now, the pain from ureter, from the upper ureter, mid ureter, lower ureter will radiate differently to different points. Upper ureter is mostly like the kidneys. From mid ureter, pain on the right side is referred to the right lower quadrant of the abdomen, McBurney's point, asked in the exam. And on the right side, it will stimulate appendicitis, and on the left side, it will stimulate diverticulitis. So these two questions are asked. Also, pain from the mid ureter can be referred to the scrotum in males or labium in the females. So, can anyone tell me the cause of this referred pain to the scrotum in males? Anyone? Just tell me the name of the dermatome supplied or the dermatome responsible. T10. T10 is responsible for the innervation in ureter and from the to the scrotum, and testis also T10 is responsible. So that if T10 is responsible there, the referred pain would be to the scrotum as well. Coming to the distal ureter, pain from distal ureter, it will radiate into the groin or testicle in the male or labia in the female. It is referred from the ilioinguinal or the genitofemoral nerves. Very important question asked in the competitive exams, which are the nerves responsible for carrying the pain from distal ureter. So need to understand that ilioinguinal or genitofemoral are responsible. If the stone or the cause of obstruction is in the intramural part of the ureter, intramural part of the ureter is that part of the ureter which is traversing inside the urinary bladder. Okay, so if the stone is lodged there, you will have symptoms of LUTS, lower urinary tract symptoms, which are suprapubic pain, not exactly suprapubic pain, but urinary frequency, urgency, dysuria, stranguria, and the pain at the tip of the penis. So, by correctly knowing the site of the referred pain, the characteristic of pain, astute physician would immediately come to know that where is the site of obstruction, whether it is upper ureter, mid ureter, lower ureter, or intramural ureter in the lower part. Cause of bladder pain or vesical pain, it is either because of overdistension of the bladder, which may be because of acute urinary retention or inflammation. Now, have you people seen any case of in your clinics and posting acute urinary obstruction? Have you people seen it? Just yes or no would do. Any people and any
No, sir.
That's okay. No questions. Okay, so see, we have two scenarios. In one scenario, a patient is wincing with pain and he's crying that I cannot void. And if you will keep a hand on his lower abdomen, you can palpate the urinary bladder. Mind it, that patient is crying, yelling, shouting, okay, on the resident in the ward that I'm not able to void. Then another patient comes, he says that I have been in the endocrine OPD for my diabetes, and off and on I can void a little bit, but I have no discomfort. So first was the scenario for acute urinary retention, and second was the scenario for chronic urinary retention. Mind it, in both the cases, the bladder will be palpable. More definitively in the acute part. In the chronic part, it would be palpable, but not that well. Point to differentiate between acute urinary retention and chronic urinary retention, which you can get in your exams if you are given a case of BPH. So the point to differentiate is pain. In acute urinary retention, patient has pain. In chronic urinary retention, the patient has no pain or very minimal discomfort. You can make a diagnosis there and then only that AUR, patient will shout, he will wince, he will cry, he will tell of pain, but the chronic retention, he would just be sitting idly in the corner of the ward waiting for his turn so that the resident might see him. Okay, so you see the statement, slowly progressive urinary obstruction and bladder dysfunction occurring in diabetes mellitus type 2 along with flaccid myogenic bladder. This is a stage where the contraction of the bladder has gone. If you have any interest in what is myogenic bladder, then we can have a separate, whenever the things are right, I can demonstrate you in the urology ward. So these people have no pain at all. And you can just imagine that they have a residual urine volume of over 1 liter. And they will have no pain. So this is chronic urinary retention. No pain. Acute urinary retention, sharp pain. So next statement, inflammatory conditions of the bladder, generally cystitis or some other anomaly which has caused inflammation in the bladder, they will cause intermittent suprapubic discomfort. Like in cystitis, Strangury is the definition asked in your viva of final year. What is the definition of Strangury? Sharp, stabbing, suprapubic pain at the end of micturition. it is involving three S. S for sharp, S for stabbing, and S for suprapubic pain. So three S's will encompass Stranguri. Always remember. Now, kidney pain covered, ureter pain covered, vesical pain covered. Coming to the prostatic pain. Prostatic pain is because of secondary to inflammation with edema and distension of the prostatic capsule. Prostate has a true capsule, false capsule. Anyone? Or both or none? No one? So that would be a homework for you. Okay. I won't tell everything. Prostatic pain is always poorly, it is all given in your Bailey, 11 Bailey. You don't need to consult Campbell and the higher books. Prostatic pain is always poorly localized, as if the patient will say that the complaint is vague in the lower abdomen, inguinal, perineal, rectal pain, penile pain. It will accompany irritative urinary symptoms. In the coming slides, we will see what is irritative and what is voiding symptoms. And if there is marked prostatic edema, then it may lead to acute urinary retention, which can be the cause in acute prostatitis or BPH with infection. There is prostatic edema and acute urinary retention. Coming to the penile pain, see, pain in the flaccid penis and pain in the erect penis. Pain in the flaccid penis is secondary to the inflammation of the bladder or urethra. Keep this in your mind while taking history. Pain in the flaccid penis is because of inflammation in the bladder, that is cystitis, or urethritis. Okay, and it is maximally felt at the urethral meatus. Pain in the erect penis is due to some disease known as Peyronie's disease, in which there is a thickening of the tunica albuginea and all, and priapism as well. So the etiology is different in flaccid and the erect penis. Coming to the testicular pain again T10 is involved. Scotal pain may be either primary or referred. Primary pain arises from within the scrotum and is usually secondary to acute epididymitis or torsion of the testis or testicular appendices. Now, what is Pehen's test? Anyone? How can you differentiate between pain of acute epididymoitis or torsion of the testis? The name of the test is Pehen's test. Can anyone explain in one line or two lines? Come on, anyone? Yeah.
So in case of the torsion, when we elevate the testis, pain will be subside.
Pain will be subsided. Why?
Sorry, sir. Appendicitis or pain will be subsided, but torsion will be increasing.
Yes. See. Am I visible to you or only the skin is visible?
Yes, sir.
Am I visible?
Yes, sir.
So see, if anything is, see, suppose the testis is hanging by the spermatic cord and there is inflammation in the spermatic cord. Okay. The inflammation is also engrossing the epidermis and the testis as well. So testis is hanging, cord is stretching. And if you lift it, the stretch gets relaxed. The stretch gets relaxed. So there is relief of pain. Pehen's test is positive and the diagnosis is acute epidermoitis or epidermitis. Understood the concept behind the Pehen's test? Should I repeat or it is clear? I can repeat, no problem, but you need to understand this. Am I clear? Should we move forward or should I explain this once more? The mechanism of Pehen's test. Come on, anyone?
Sir, once more, please.
See, there is spermatic cord, then epididymitis and the testis. There is inflammation in the testis, orchitis. There is inflammation and infection in the epidermis, known as epidermitis. Orchitis plus epidermitis, the testis is hanging in the scrotum, and there is a stretch of the overlying capsule. So if you put a hand and lift the testis, that stretch gets relieved. That stretch gets relieved, and there is a sense of relief, which is called as Prehen's test positive. And the diagnosis here is acute epididymolysis or acute epididymitis. Torsion is removed from the list. In torsion, that pain would not be relieved because the cord has twisted. Whether you lift it or pull it, that won't increase or decrease the pain. Clear? Should we proceed?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Coming to the characteristics of this scrotal pain, chronic. See, what we were discussing was acute pain. Now coming to the chronic scrotal pain, it may be because of non-inflammatory conditions such as hydrocele or varicocele. The people have read, and the characteristic of a chronic pain is dull, heavy sensation that does not radiate. Try to differentiate between the acute pain and the chronic pain. Okay, testes arise embryologically in close proximity to the kidneys. T10, again remember, so any pain in the kidneys or retroperitoneum would be referred to the testis, that is the cause, T10. So that was the pain part. Okay, pain of the genitourinary tract. Now we are coming to hematuria and we have to cover LUTs as well. Okay, we have time, I think. Was the pain part clear? The different types of pain?
Yes, sir.
So, okay, we'll proceed. Only the girls are answering. The boys? Pain part is clear now?
Yes, sir.
So, thank you. Okay, so for hematuria, now the next most important thing is hematuria. Okay, hematuria is what? Presence of blood in the urine. The layman will say, but you need to understand that greater than 3 RBCs per high power microscopic field is significant. What is significant hematuria is greater than 3 RBCs per high power microscopic field. Okay, that is significant hematuria. Now, types may be gross hematuria or microscopic hematuria. What is gross hematuria? Anything which is visible is gross hematuria. Non-visible reported in the urinary report is microscopic hematuria. What may be the timing of hematuria? Initial, total, or terminal. Initial hematuria, the pathology is in the urethra. The urine is coming from behind. Pathology is in the urethra, maybe CA or something. So initial hematuria, just at the beginning of menstruation. What is total hematuria? Be it beginning, be it mid, be it late, in every phase there is hematuria. So that is total hematuria. Bladder or the upper tract pathology is involved. What is terminal hematuria? When the act of menstruation is on the verge of completion, the bladder neck tries to close, the prostatic urethra collapses, and if a pathology is there, then because of the closure and movement at that time, because it is a dynamic process, if the hematuria occurs at the end of menstruation, then the pathology is at the bladder neck or prostatic pathology. So remember the timing, initial, total, or terminal. If you are given a case of hematuria in the exam, there are a few questions which you need to ask the patient. Gross or microscopic, you understand. What time of the, at what time initial, total, terminal, is the hematuria associated with pain? See, if a patient says that I have hematuria and that hematuria is associated with pain, so immediately in your mind, this thing should strike that the pathology is in the upper tract. Upper tract means kidneys, and the ureter. Okay, the pathology might be in the chalices, might be in the parenchyma, it might be a renal cancer, it might be a transitional cell carcinoma of the pelvis or the upper ureter. So with pain, hematuria, pathology would be in the upper tract. This will be asked in your exams. So be very clear. Hematuria with pain, pathology in the upper tract. Now, hematuria with clots. You all understand clot. What is a clot? So if the shape of the clot is linear, vermiform, worm-like, cylindrical, this will mean that the clot was made in the upper tract, and while traversing in the ureter, it took that shape. So, meaning of a vermiform or linear clot, that the pathology was in the upper tract, and if the clot is irregular, then most probably the origin of the clot is from the bladder or lower tract. So all these points you need to understand. Another thing which you need to ask the patient while taking a history, if given a case of hematuria, is the duration. When did the bleeding start? It is continuous or intermittent? What is the color? Are there any clots? Is the patient on any blood thinning agents, anticoagulants, antiplatelets? Timing we have discussed. Pain. So you need to ask whether it is painful or painless, and whether has the patient taken any drugs, so that if the drug is excreted in the urine, the color of the urine has changed. Rifampicin causes the orange or roughly orangish hue in the urine. And what are the associated symptoms? So these 7 things: symptom, drug, pain, timing, duration, color, and any blood thinning agents. You need to ask any patients of hematuria. Then in hematuria, what you need to cover is the abdominal examination. For the kidney mass, you see bloatability, bimanual palpable. You need to place your hand suprapubic to palpate any, is the bladder distended or not. Mercy sponge, you can leave it. Then DRE, very important for prostate pathology. Is the prostate tender? Is it a smooth and large prostate, or is it a hard, craggy prostate, nodular prostate, which is a sign of a carcinoma, which might be a sign of carcinoma prostate? Nodularity has some other etiologies as well, but at your level, you need to understand that if the prostate has a nodule, hard, mucosa is not mobile, then the diagnosis is toward carcinoma prostate. And in females, the pathology can be from the posterior bladder wall. So that's why the examination in females. Coming to the next part, what are the investigations for hematuria? See, the overall investigation we would discuss sometime else. But for hematuria per se, you need to understand what are the investigations, that how would you proceed. So you will say hematuria, examiner will say, what is the next radiological investigation? Then you can say, sir, the next radiological investigation is ultrasound. Why ultrasound? In ultrasound, if it is a solid mass, go for CT. If it is a cystic mass or hydronephrosis, go for IVP. So this is ultrasound will give you a rough idea about the pathology. Now these are the points which I have taken, because these are the points very commonly asked in the NEET exams and in the clinical exams as well. Risk of malignancy for asymptomatic microhematuria, 1.8 to 4.3%, very commonly asked. For symptomatic microhematuria, it is 10.5%. These two statements learned by heart. Another very important statement: gross hematuria. For gross hematuria, there is at times 50% demonstrable cause asked in the exam. Then among those, what is the chances of urological malignancy? 20 to 25% would have a urological malignancy. So all these points you need to understand and learn by heart. Coming to microscopic hematuria, it is a sign. Okay, these we have discussed before. Now, what is the test for microscopic hematuria? It may be a dipstick test. The mechanism is there for you to read from the book. Some peroxidase reducing activity is there. The sensitivity of dipstick is 90%, but it has got a low specificity, 65% to 90%. It may be false positive. This is asked in the exams. Dipstick test, false positive because of menses, dehydration, exercise-induced hemoglobinuria, myoglobinuria. How to differentiate between hemoglobinuria, myoglobinuria? There is supernatant. We have to see the nature of supernatant. That we will discuss later. Positive dipstick alone is insufficient to promote an evaluation. So, the AUA, American Urological Association, it says a positive dipstick does not define microscopic hematuria, and a positive dipstick reading merits microscopic examination to confirm whenever you understand, whenever dipstick is positive, you send the patient for a routine examination, routine urine examination. Okay, so any urological evaluation should be based solely on the findings from microscopic examination of urinary sediments and not on a dipstick reading. This will be asked. Now, what is the differential diagnosis? We have discussed it before. Just to remember, neoplasm is 1.8 to 4.3%, calculus is 6%, and benign prostatic enlargement is 12.9%. This will be asked in the exam. 13% is the cause for asymptomatic microscopic hematuria. 13% cases are due to VPH. 13%. Remember this. Now, another question which we have discussed before: the shape of the clot, amorphous, vermiform. It is clear. Then hematuria with pain. Pain in association with hematuria is from the upper urinary tract hematuria or obstruction clot colic. We have discussed it before. Then again, when is cystoscopy required? Can any one of you tell me what is cystoscopy? We have shortage of time. You need to hurry. Can anyone just tell me what is cystoscopy? Come on, anyone. A rough idea would suffice. No need to be exact. What is cystoscopy? Anyone, please. Anyone? Okay, yes or no? Do you understand the concept of cystoscopy, endoscopy? Come on, here.
The
Yes,
camera
sir.
is introduced
Sir.
through urethral meatus into the bladder and urinary tract.
Yes, at your level, this is sufficient. The camera put in a scope. That scope will be introduced, not the camera. The scope will be introduced from the urethra and the bladder, and the walls and everything would be seen. That is cystoscopy. Very correct. Whoever told this. So you see, hematuria with more than 35 years of age, cystoscopy is a must. Less than 35 years of age, he can do with some other investigations as well. But cystoscopy is always recommended if patient has symptomatic hematuria, gross hematuria, regardless of age. So you understand this as well, and sit confidently in your exams. After the radiological investigations, cystoscopy is a must if the patient is more than 35 years of age and he has symptomatic microscopic hematuria or gross hematuria, regardless of the age. This we will cover in the investigation part, the MDCT and the other things. This you don't require. What is gross hematuria? What are the differential diagnoses? See, any increase in the degree of hematuria increases the likelihood of finding a significant lesion. So if there is gross hematuria, 50% would have a demonstrable cause, and among those 50%, 20 to 25% would have a urological malignancy, most common bladder cancer and kidney cancer. This will be asked in your competitive exams and in the clinical cases as well, in the final year exams. How to differentiate between hematuria of bladder origin or prostatic origin? Intractable hematuria localizing to the bladder. It may be because of hemorrhagic cystitis, maybe because of drug. Cyclophosphamide is the most common. It will have irregular shaped clots. Okay. And for prostatic origin hematuria, patient will give a history of bladder outlet obstruction in the form of BPH. So the question which is asked in the exam is what is that element which is causing that vascularity in prostate? So it is VEGF. Increased VEGF, just mark up this. Increased VEGF is the cause for increased angiogenesis and vascularity in the prostate. This will be asked in the exams and in the theory, this thing in the Viva, if you do well. One more important thing, which is it won't be asked in the exams, but for the future exams as well. What is Nutcracker syndrome or renal vein entrapment syndrome? Because in this condition also hematuria occurs. It is the compression, you see. The renal vein is compressed between the aorta and the supramesenteric artery. Okay. So any increase in the left renal vein pressure would cause small volume rupture of the capillaries in the collecting system. For bleeding to occur, the injury should be in the PCS. Then only it would come in the ureter and the bladder and then outside now. So you remember this syndrome, Nutcracker syndrome or the renal vein entrapment syndrome. Do we have time to cover LUTS? I need 10 minutes. Do you have time or any other class?
Sir, another class. There is a class from 10 to 11,
So
medicine.
should we need to stop here or I can take 5 minutes?
So you can take 5 minutes.
Thank you. See, low and attack symptom will have irritative component and voiding component. In irritative symptoms, it will be asked in the exams what are the features. Frequency. What is frequency? The normal voiding frequency is 5 to 6 times a day, approximately 300 each time. So more times you void is the frequency. Then is the nocturia or the nighttime voiding. What is the cause of nocturia? It may be because of any psychological origin. It may be because of congestive heart failure. It may be because of the peripheral edema. There are things which are asked in the exams: frequency without nocturia and nocturia without frequency. The causes are in front of you. Then what is urgency? It is the compelling need to urinate, which is difficult to defer. It may be a sense because of pain, pressure, or discomfort. So urgency, frequency, nocturia, irritative symptoms. Always remember. Then what are the obstructive or avoiding symptoms? It may be because of obstruction at the level of prostate or at the level of urethra in the form of urethral stricture. Hesitancy is a delay is a delay in the start of maturation. Intermittency is involuntary start, then stop, then start, then stop. It is intermittency. Weak stream is very poor flow. It is suppose the stream was very good before, and of late it has come down. So it is known as weak stream. Post-void dippling is because of the residual urine in the bulbar urethra at the end of maturation. So all these hesitancy, intermittency, weak stream, post-void dippling come in the obstructive symptoms. Retention we have discussed. Then also staining. What is staining? Use of abdominal musculature to urinate. So this is also an obstructive symptom. So you understand IPSS and AUA, and then we can complete the thing. IPSS was made in 1992 to encompass the symptoms of a patient with LUTS. It was given by Barry in 1992. So what were the points? It got 3 irritative and 4 voiding symptoms: incomplete emptying, frequency, intermittency, urgency, weak steam, staining, nocturia. These were the points, and the patient was asked that among these symptoms, for each symptom, do you have nothing of this sort, or you have out of 5, say less than 1 time in 5, or less than half the time, about half the time, more than half the time, almost always. So score was given from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in the last total was done. The total symptom score ranges from 0 to 35, which scores of 0 to 7 is mild, 8 to 19 is moderate, and 20 to 35 is severe. So you learn this by heart. Okay, incontinence can be of urgency type or can be overflow type. Urgency is a precipitous loss of urine preceded by a strong urge to void, maybe because of cystitis, infection, neurogenic bladder. Overflow is because there is some stricture, there is some obstruction, and the bladder is filling. So at one moment, the bladder will give way that I cannot hold more urine, and some leakage will be there. That is known as paradoxical or overflow urinary incontinence. Enuresis is incontinence that occurs during sleep. What is asked in the exam is, it occurs normally in children up to 3 years of age, but persists in about 15% at 5 and 1% at 15, asked in the exam. Hematophrenia is presence of blood in the seminal fluid. Cause is non-specific inflammation of the prostate or seminal vesicles, resolves spontaneously within several weeks. Hematuria, if you have placed a catheter or some instrumentation, then passage of gas in urine, or if you have not done this, then there might be some fistula between the intestine and the bladder. Cause may be diverticulitis, carcinoma, or enteritis. Urethral discharge, last but not the least, pudent discharge that is thick, profuse, yellow to gray is gonococcal urethritis, and a discharge which is watery and scant is non-specific urethritis, again asked in the exams and in your clinics as well. That is, discharge is suggestive but not confirmatory of carcinoma of the urethra. Thank you. I'm done. Thanks for the patient listening, all of you. Any questions? I'm happy to answer pertaining to the clinical symptoms. So anything which you didn't understand or you have doubt, or we can wrap up. Should we stop then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, sir.